first talk this afternoon is David Wong from Manchester, and the title speaks for itself. Thank you.
The invitation to speak this afternoon. First, let me apologise that Neil was up for and London in person. It's disappointing not to catch up with my colleagues, Neil's in Brussels, which I trust means that Brexit is going to be sorted by the end of today. So we're both based in the Centre for Health Informatics at the University of Manchester, which is the pleasure of being at the intersection of health care and computer science. So I'm moving a slide on here, so if that's not working, please let me know. So I've been asked to help facilitate discussion into afternoon by exposing or reminding us of the type of computer science challenges that are involved in getting medical knowledge into real-life decision-making assisting systems. And so the starting point of this presentation is therefore the knowledge management lifecycle applied to computable biomedical knowledge. So let's start at the top here, where we're creating a computable representation of the knowledge. I'll explain what that is in a moment. Making that knowledge shareable, storing the knowledge and making it findable to others, using the knowledge, typically in a clinical system, and finally revising the knowledge when errors are identified or there's new evidence that makes the knowledge or part of it obsolete. So I think you'll have seen these slides earlier today from Jeremy, and I'd like to reiterate that we're only going to be considering explicit knowledge here. So we will not be considering how do we get from data to information to knowledge. So that in itself is a large topic of debate in computer science, especially with the advent of deep learning, where researchers are correctly creating knowledge based on the output of machine learning algorithms that detect associations, not causes, in data. We're also going to be considering this problem from a health system perspective, that is to say, what are the computer science challenges at an NHS level, rather than just a provider or an organisation. So on to the challenges. So we've superimposed a set of challenges corresponding to each element of the management lifecycle here. So in total, we've highlighted 11 different challenges. So for instance, as we create knowledge, we consider the ways in which our explicit knowledge, clinical guidelines, and so forth can get lost in translation notes. And we can subcategorize those into 3 challenges: formalising knowledge, disambiguation, and correspondence to the system. And we'll consider some of the individual challenges in a little bit more detail now. But obviously, we're fairly time restricted, so it'll be much more of a whistle-stop thinking. So the first challenge at the knowledge creation stage is formalising knowledge. A formal or computable representation of knowledge is a digital representation of our clinical knowledge that allows computers to edit it, manipulate it, reason with it. And for that to be possible, it's essential that the form of our computed knowledge accurately represents the clinical meaning in an unambiguous and accurate manner. So that's to say, if we are presented with the digital form of the knowledge, or whatever that means, we can accurately get back to the original non-digital form as our one-to-one map. To do this, we typically impose a strict language system in terms that have an exact meaning. So for instance, in mathematics, algebra is one form of formalisation. Our symbols are pluses and minuses and multiplications have very specific meaning, that we know exactly what they mean, how they interact with each other. So we know that multiplication takes precedence over addition. So we can create very rich mathematical relationships that are internally consistent. With clinical knowledge, we're typically trying to do the same thing, but rather than using mathematical symbols, we put an ontology, which is also known as a knowledge graph. And these graphs, or really networks, attempt to represent entities, things, ideas, and events with their interdependent properties and relations according to a system of categories. And these ideas have been going around for the last few years or so, and the field is fairly mature. So, for instance, there are ontology editor tools that allow us to create these knowledge graphs using a graphical interface. So a knowledge graph in practice might look something like this. In the simple case, so we have entities, that is individual objects that are categorized in some way. So Da Vinci, Lily, and James are all people. And there are relationships between our entities. So Da Vinci painted the Mona Lisa. And in here, these are written in words, but will have very specific logical rules underpinning that. So for instance, you can see that the Louvre is located in Paris. That is located in relationship is hierarchical. So if I said that Old Trafford is located in Stratford, Stratford is located in Greater Manchester, then I can deduce that Old Trafford is also located in Greater Manchester. So by being specific, I can deduce extra facts. Knowledge graphs like these are nowadays used to be extensively for large tech corporations like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. For instance, when Google returns search results or consult its knowledge graph enrich. So here's an example of nice guidance on the assessment and management of chronic kidney disease in primary care, and it's been translated into a knowledge graph. So this is work with colleagues Fazio and Jared from the School of Computer Science over here. So please note that it's only a first very high level knowledge representation that at the moment is just aiming to preserve the structure of that initial nice guidance. It's not the final computable representation. That requires a lot more detail, and we'll see an example of that in a moment. One of the parallel challenges of formalising knowledge is disambiguation. In general, we want to convert some sorts of explicit knowledge, say our nice recommendations, into a computable form. We run into problems when that source document is ambiguous for one reason or another. And so that tends to be for one of three reasons. So firstly, it could be poorly specified, or there's some implied reasoning. So for instance, in the National Early Warning Score for vital signs in hospitals, if the score is between 1 to 4, and this is a quote, a registered nurse is to decide if an increased frequency of monitoring is required. So do they really mean that nurses should only decide about increasing frequency of observations, or should they be considering decreasing the frequency if the score was previously higher? And the common sense reading is that they should provide an appropriate level of care, so the wording is probably fine for humans, but not necessarily for computers. Second, it might be that for the best one in the world, it's still ambiguous. Even very simple sentences have ambiguous meaning, and if you don't believe me, consider the sentence, do you like me? And emphasize each word in turn and think about what that means and semantically in terms of the meaning. Finally, it might be that the practical reason guideline is ambiguous, is that how we tend to work in practice, is that if there's a committee, we tend to become vague when we can't agree, as the easiest way forward for committee. So, in general, computable knowledge is this translation of the source material, and it's not always straightforward because the material itself is not entirely unambiguous. For example, in that chronic kidney disease example from before, full unambiguous knowledge graph with those 12 nodes or objects beforehand had to be expanded to take into account all steps explicitly, and that resulted in 86 nodes or decisions being made. This highlights that we need some kind of mechanism to translate between our source material and our computable objects. And ideally, we want some standardized process so that we can have assurances around validation, methods to identify if we've got translation wrong, methods to update our computerized version of things if the paper version changes. And that's not entirely trivial. So we can imagine a scenario in which we have a one-line change in our paper guidance that hasn't been thought through entirely from a computing perspective, and that leads to ambiguity down the line. So a good translation system should identify what kinds of ambiguities might occur. One way of tackling this is by encouraging knowledge developers to think about their audience, both people and computers, up front. So one strategy to ensure good correspondence between the paper-based guideline and the associated knowledge object, and so this is described by Good et al. In 2009, is to develop the two versions of the guideline, the computable version and the human version, at the same time, and predefined points, the development process where the two teams meet and verify consistency between the paper-based recommendation and the computer version. This can have implications for both the computable version of the guideline as well as the paper-based guidelines. They both iterate terms. So this is obviously in Dutch, so there's an example from Leo's. The strategy was applied back in 2004 when the Netherlands Art Foundation developed a new version of their clinical guidance, cardiac rehab. And the guideline comprises a number of clinical algorithms to assess each patient's needs, preferences, and goals for rehab. At the same time as the paper guideline that was developed, a team from the University of Amsterdam developed a clinical decision support system using a tool called Euston, and they developed these in parallel and regularly checked between the paper guidance and the computer algorithms, which led to changes at both sides. So, for instance, it was sometimes jointly decided to disambiguate a specific decision point by describing more explicit decision criteria than initially happens in the paper guidance. So actually, this process helps to make paper guidance more explicit. And so eventually the algorithms were used as a basis of a clinical decision support system that rolled out to about 40 hospitals, and there's been a cluster randomized trial showing that system has a beneficial effect on clinical decision making. Having formalized our knowledge, we need to consider knowledge sharing. I won't talk very much about it, though we can easily write a piece of code in some language that represents a computable version of the guideline. But if we just do that, then one disadvantage is that the code wouldn't be easily shareable between providers and systems. New code would have to be written for each EPR, and there'd be no guarantee that these different implementations would actually have the same semantics. Each version would have their own bugs. A revision of the paper guideline would mean that each individual implementation would need to be revised separately, further increasing the risks of bugs and inconsistency. So what we need is a formal language that can be used to create these knowledge objects that are independent of the HR system. So on the slide here, gives a couple of historical examples that are some still in use now of a kind of language semantic framework that's used to create an interoperable meaning, as well as interoperable meaning, so representative knowledge is more than just using a consistent terminology. So these early languages for describing shareable computer knowledge objects struggled with dependencies of local technology resources. Modern representations of computable knowledge typically use standard frameworks to ensure independence of information resources, and things like Snowman's CT to incorporate generic international terminology. So we'll skip on capturing data. But broadly, that's the idea of making sure that all knowledge about knowledge, who created it, when it should be revised, for instance, stored with the knowledge, to ensure transparency. It's about ties into the next challenge. And verifying authenticity is relatively simple when there's only one source of truth. So, for instance, we trust nice guidance as being absolute source of truth and happy days. But what do we do when there are multiple sources of truth or no sole gatekeeper? And that's a real challenge. One solution that tends to get bandied around in these situations when we don't have one source of truth is blockchain, a distributed ledger in which everyone can see the latest guidelines and know who changed it. And I'll just throw out that I'm really skeptical about whether that can work in practice, in that the only really successful use of blockchain we've seen so far, which is what users have an incentive for keeping the record up to date. They get money. And there's no obvious mechanism for this in healthcare that can't be delivered in some other way. Having got our data, we want to do it in some way, and typically we combine our knowledge in some form using a reasoning engine to give us advice on some new, previously unseen case. And this is very hard computationally as well. We can automate some logic, but it becomes very challenging in practice when multiple guidelines may apply at once. And so one prominent example of this, of a recent report of the Untitled Chapter, which you may have seen on Twitter or Times, in which men and women with identical symptoms that corresponded to cardiac arrest were told different advice. Men were told to seek urgent help, you might have cardiac arrest, and women were told you are more likely that this is going to be an anxiety attack rather than a cardiac arrest. And obviously caused a lot of consternation and furore from missions. The defence from the development team was to say that, well, that's what the literature said, which may be true. So that's a rather simplistic view. We need to have this meta-knowledge on how to combine things robustly. For instance, we need that prior knowledge that tells us to be more worried about certain types of conditions than others, regardless of the probabilities of something occurring. To wrap up, it's one more slide summarising the main computer science challenges in the management life cycle. So what we haven't covered is 9, 10, and 11, which is how do we update our knowledge robustly. Actually, some of this falls into place if we've done the earlier steps well. But I hope this has given a good impression of the computer science challenges that exist in the area. So I'd like to finish with a final slide, a future vision that was formulated by computer scientist Carol Goebel from the University of Manchester here. And in this vision, all knowledge is described as computable objects right from the start of our evidence scientific method. So for instance, all scientific publications would be described and published as computable objects or research objects. So we'd have formal representations right at the start. So the natural language text describing the experiment and the outcome could be a surface representation of that object, but the core be computable knowledge that could be further processed to yield, for instance, systematic reviews, so you could do them automatically, and clinical practice guidance, all available on demand through fully automated inference. So the role of humans then shift towards oversight, governance, and quality assurance. And this obviously fits in with the overall drive within medicine to have a more consistent evidence-approached framework through things like the equation method. The Department of Computer Science at the University of Manchester is developing these methodologies and tools to try and make that vision a reality. So that's where I'll end today. There's a few resources on the slides here. I'm sure they'll be made available afterwards. Thank you for your time, and do feel free to ask some questions. I'm Alex. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That came over really well. We've got a couple of minutes for questions, please. Yes, I think it's Jay. Yeah.
So, David, I hope you can hear me. So this is really interesting, especially the challenges. I guess one of the challenges with symbolic or representational knowledge systems is tractability. I think you kind of referred to it when you said, what if there's multiple sources of truth? So I'd love to hear what your views are in things like word vectors, which are also models that are computationally reproducible, that you can actually use for inferences. So if you look at Google's BERT or Elmo, which actually powers their translation engines, you can actually go to it and essentially say, if I tell you boy is to girl, tell me what the answer is for a king, and it'll tell you either it's a queen or a princess, and that's also inferential knowledge. So would you see that as a different way of representing and using knowledge, and do you see that as having a role in currently how we use and consume knowledge?
So I'm very sorry, I couldn't quite hear that.
All right, that's fine.
Can you repeat the example about the boy and the girl? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think so. Right. So I guess I'm actually having to repeat what I said, but so I was saying, what is your view on how machine learning algorithms like BERT, Elmo actually work? Because I can actually ask BERT or word vectors a question that says, if a boy is to a girl, what is a king? What is to a king? And it will give me the answer and it'll say a queen or a princess. And that is also for inferential knowledge. I could potentially ask an ontology, yes? So how do you view that in terms of actually being more tractable and learnable or repeatable? And do you see that as a challenge or as an opportunity for us to adopt something new? I hope you could hear that.
So I heard it a little bit, so I hope I'm answering your question. We'll see. In natural language processing, you're right, so you can do a lot of things with word vectors, where you're looking at similarity of, so in fact there's these famous examples of things like boy is king as girl is queen. And what we are doing are measuring similarity, so they're really measuring the association between, rather than really doing any thing that's thoughtful. And one of the issues is that we are very unstable. So actually, the king-queen example is very famous, but it's not especially robust. And one of the challenges of using these kinds of methods is that much in the same as kind of traditional machine learning is that they're very good for finding patterns in data, but we need some kind of formal knowledge representation underneath to be able to work out formal inferences. I don't know if that answers your question because I didn't get it. I hope that expanded on.
No, it didn't, but that's okay, I guess. I think we probably move on, give chance for other people.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Now, we're going to move on to the next talk now, but if you've got that question that's burning now, please write it down and we will pick it up in the plenary at the end. Thank you very much, David. Very helpful, and thanks for the slides.